Daniel Rios sat alone in his small, dim apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling like it held the answers he'd spent years searching for. He was only in his early 30s, but he looked older, like life had pulled the hope out of him one quiet struggle at a time. His dark hair was messy, his eyes dull, and the weight on his shoulders felt heavier than his tired body could carry. Once he believed he was going to do something meaningful. He used to talk about plans and dreams with a bright voice, almost excited. But now those dreams felt like stories from someone else's life. The years had not been kind. Every job he worked seemed to end too soon. Layoffs, budget cuts, or bosses who didn't care enough to keep him around. It was always something, and somehow the blame always came back to him. The worst part wasn't the job losses. It was his mother's illness, something slow and cruel that drained their money and their spirits. Hospital bills piled up faster than he could handle, and every payment reminder felt like a punch to the chest. His younger sister, Marissa, still tried to stay strong, but Daniel could see the fear in her eyes. She was counting on him, and he was failing her. Underneath everything, buried like a splinter under his skin, was the guilt from a past mistake, one that still woke him up at night. He never talked about it, not even to Marissa. He carried it alone, convinced that the world would turn its back on him if anyone knew the truth. He believed he deserved the sadness that clung to him. He believed he was beyond saving. On the kitchen table sat an eviction notice, bright red and impossible to ignore. Daniel had read it so many times that he knew every line by heart. He tried to picture what would happen to his mother and sister if they lost the apartment. The thought squeezed his heart until his breath shook. His phone buzzed again. Another past-due hospital bill, another demand he couldn't meet. Daniel buried his face in his hands. His thoughts drifted back to the little things he'd done over the years. Small lies, shortcuts, excuses he'd made to hide his failures. At the time, they didn't seem like much. But now, looking back, he could see how they added up, each one pushing him a step closer to the edge he now stood on. He wished he could go back and change something. Anything. But the past was locked behind him, and only the consequences remained. That night, after hours of staring at unpaid bills, Daniel opened his laptop. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe a loan, maybe a miracle. His hands shook as he scrolled through ads and websites that promised help he didn't believe in. Then he saw it. A plain black ad with white letters. Financial salvation. No credit. No collateral. Only commitment. No company name. No phone number. Just a link. It didn't look real. It didn't even look safe. But Daniel stared at it, as if it were the last door in a burning building. Something about those words pulled at him. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was fear. Maybe both. He clicked. A page opened with a simple message. We can help. Daniel swallowed hard. He told himself it was stupid, dangerous. But he also told himself that nothing could be worse than watching his family suffer because he failed them. If this was his last option, then maybe it wasn't wrong to take it. Maybe he was already too far gone to worry about right or wrong. Decision to choose darkness. The message on his screen flickered, and then a form appeared. Simple, strange, and cold. It asked for things that made no sense. A promise of the soul, written like it was nothing more important than a signature. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He knew this wasn't normal. He knew this wasn't safe. But the fear in his chest pushed him forward. He imagined his mother's worried face, his sister crying because she didn't know where they would go. He told himself there was no other choice. With trembling hands and a hollow heart, Daniel filled out the form and pressed submit. The screen turned black. Daniel leaned back, breathing hard, knowing deep down that he had just traded something he could never get back. But he also believed there was no other way. And that belief, more than anything, pushed him into the darkness that waited for him. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt like someone, or something, was standing in the dark corner of his room. When morning came, he sat on the edge of his bed, exhausted and uncertain. He tried to convince himself that the strange website was just a scam or a dream. But when he opened his laptop again, a new message waited for him. Your request has been accepted. A representative is on the way. His stomach twisted. A knock echoed through the apartment. Soft. Calm. Too calm. Daniel froze. Nobody ever knocked this early, not even neighbors. His hand shook as he walked to the door and opened it. A tall man in a gray suit stood in the hallway. His smile was polite, almost warm, but his eyes told another story. They were too sharp, too steady, like they saw straight through Daniel's skin and the parts he tried to hide. "Good morning, Daniel," the man said in a voice smooth enough to make Daniel uneasy. "My name is Mr. Vale. We have business to discuss." Daniel stepped back without thinking. He didn't remember giving his name. He didn't remember giving his address. Yet here this man stood, like he already belonged in Daniel's world. Mr. Vale entered the apartment and looked around with quiet interest, as if studying every detail. He carried a slim black folder in his hand. Daniel couldn't look away from it. "This is the contract you agreed to," Mr. Vale said, opening the folder and placing a sheet of paper on the table. The words across the page shimmered faintly, almost alive. "Your signature will complete the agreement." Daniel scanned the document. Most of it didn't make sense. The language felt old, sharp, and strange. But one thing was clear: wealth in exchange for the soul. Daniel's hands felt cold. His heart pounded painfully against his ribs. But he also thought of his mother lying in her hospital bed, and his sister trying to act strong while fear ate at her. He felt trapped, like the world had closed every door except this one. With a weak breath, he signed. The moment the pen touched the paper, Daniel felt a chill rush through him, like the room had breathed in, and he had breathed out something he didn't know he needed. Mr. Vale smiled, closed the folder, and gave a slight nod. "It begins now." And then he left. Just like that. Things started happening fast. The next morning, Daniel checked his mother's hospital account. The balance was zero. Every bill paid. No explanation. No message. Just cleared. His phone rang within minutes. A company he barely remembered applying to wanted to interview him. Not next week. Not tomorrow. Today. Daniel walked into their office expecting another failure. Instead, they offered him a position before he finished the interview. The salary was more than he'd ever earned. They called him exactly what they needed, though he hadn't said anything special. By the end of the week, new clothes filled his closet. His refrigerator was stocked. His landlord apologized for the eviction notice, calling it a mistake and offering to renew the lease. Money solved everything around him. Problems fell away like leaves in the wind. But each victory felt strangely heavy. Daniel tried to celebrate. He took his sister out for dinner. He brought his mother gifts that made her smile for the first time in months. But beneath the surface, he felt wrong. Hollow, like the happiness wasn't his to keep. At night, he lay awake thinking about the contract, about Mr. Vale's eyes, about the cold rush he felt when he signed his name. He told himself he had done what he needed to do. He told himself this was for his family. But each time he looked in the mirror, he felt like a stranger stared back. He began withdrawing from the people he cared about, scared they'd notice something was different. Something broken. It started small. A shadow passing behind him at work. Only no one was there. A voice whispering his name when he was alone. A text with no sender that read, "We're watching." Daniel blamed stress at first. But the strange things didn't stop. One night, he woke up gasping from a dream of falling into darkness. At the foot of his bed stood Mr. Vale, calm, smiling, waiting. But when Daniel blinked, the figure was gone. From that day on, he couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Vale was always somewhere nearby, just out of sight. The reminders of the contract grew harder to ignore. Daniel had traded his soul for salvation. But the price was only beginning to show itself. Daniel's new life looked perfect from the outside, but inside he felt like he was slowly sinking into a deep, silent pit. No amount of money or comfort filled the strange emptiness inside him. Each morning he woke up with a tightness in his chest, like something unseen was pressing down on him. Every night he lay awake, waiting for the slightest sound, afraid of what he might see if he closed his eyes too long. He tried to ignore the fear, but it only grew stronger. At work, he couldn't focus. At home, he couldn't relax. Even simple things, standing in line at a store, eating a meal, felt heavy now, as if someone was watching his every move. One Sunday afternoon, without planning it, He found himself walking down a quiet street he rarely visited. His feet moved on their own, carrying him toward an old stone church at the corner. The building stood tall and calm, sunlight resting softly on the stained glass windows. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something break through his numbness, a faint pull, almost like a whisper. He didn't go to church. He hadn't in years, but he stepped inside anyway. The air inside was cool and gentle. A small congregation sat scattered across wooden pews while a choir sang softly. Daniel stood near the back, unsure why he was there. He didn't come for prayer or comfort. At least, that's what he told himself. Still, something about the quiet space soothed him. The tension in his shoulders loosened. His heartbeat slowed. For a moment, he felt almost safe. Almost. Daniel sat down in a back pew, trying to disappear into the dim light. He lowered his head and let his mind drift. He didn't pray, but he let the silence wash over him. The choir's voices rose and fell like waves, steady and peaceful. But then the air changed. A chill slid across the back of his neck, soft but sharp enough to break through his calm. Daniel looked up, confused. Something felt wrong, like the peaceful atmosphere had suddenly shifted. He scanned the room, trying to find the source of the feeling. Then he saw him. Mr. Vale, sitting in the far pew, legs crossed, hands folded neatly in his lap. He wasn't looking at the choir or at the pastor. He was looking straight at Daniel, and smiling. Daniel's heart dropped into his stomach. The room seemed to tilt, the air turning heavy and cold. His breath caught in his throat. He blinked, hoping he was imagining things, but no. Mr. Vale was still there, still watching him with that calm, too steady gaze. Daniel's hands began to tremble. He tried to look away, but his eyes kept drifting back to Mr. Vale, as if drawn by fear itself. The moment the choir ended their song, Daniel stood up too fast. His legs felt weak, but he pushed past people in the pew and hurried toward the door. He stumbled into the courtyard outside, breathing hard. His chest felt tight, his hands cold and sweating. The sunlight didn't warm him. The quiet church garden felt suddenly wrong, like even the birds didn't want to sing. He leaned against a stone wall, trying to steady his shaking breath. He had come here to find peace, maybe even hope. But instead, the one person or creature he feared most had followed him to the one place he thought would be safe. A sickening truth settled into his stomach. He had believed that once he signed a contract, he walked away from God, away from anything good. But seeing Mr. Vale inside a sacred place shattered everything he thought he understood. If even a church couldn't protect him, then where could he go? Footsteps approached slowly, steady, unhurried. Daniel didn't need to look up to know who it was. Mr. Vale stopped beside him, hands in his pockets, looking around the courtyard as if admiring the flowers. "You ran," Mr. Vale said softly, his tone almost amused. "Why?" "I wasn't hiding." Daniel forced himself to look at him. "What are you doing here?" he whispered, though his voice came out shaky. Mr. Vale tilted his head. "Churches don't keep me out, Daniel. They simply reveal things. They show what's broken, what's weak, what's missing." He gave Daniel a sideways glance. "That's why you came here today, isn't it?" Daniel's stomach twisted. He didn't answer. Mr. Vale smiled faintly. "You weren't chosen at random, Daniel. You were chosen because your heart was already cracked, already tired, already searching for something to hold on to." He leaned closer. "And you reached for me." Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. Mr. Vale's voice softened, almost gentle. "Your soul isn't fully mine yet. There are formalities, a waiting period. You still have time to walk a different path." For a moment, Daniel felt a spark of hope. But then Mr. Vale's smile sharpened. "Of course," he added, "choosing that path comes with a price. A painful one, and I don't think you're ready for that." Daniel stared at him, his fear mixing with confusion. "If my soul isn't yours yet, then what happens now?" he asked. Mr. Vale stepped back and straightened his suit. "Now, Daniel, you decide. Continue down the road you're on, and everything stays easy, smooth, comfortable." His eyes darkened, but his smile stayed friendly. "Or turn back and face a pain you've been running from for years." Daniel felt his chest tighten again, this time not from fear, but from something deeper. Something he didn't want to name. Mr. Vale took a slow step away, giving Daniel one last knowing look. "The window is small," he said, "and shrinking." Then he walked off, silent and unhurried, disappearing into the street like he belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Daniel stood frozen in the church courtyard, terrified and uncertain. But for the first time, he felt a question rising inside him. What if there was another way? And what would it cost him to take it? Daniel tried to return to normal life after seeing Mr. Vale at the church, but the encounter left a mark he couldn't shake. His thoughts twisted into knots, and his emotions tangled so tightly that he could barely breathe. Each morning he woke up exhausted, even if he'd slept a full night. His dreams had become darkness, shadows, whispers, things he couldn't remember clearly, but that clung to him long after he opened his eyes. The world around him felt wrong. He couldn't tell if the lights in his apartment flickered more than usual, or if his eyes were just playing tricks on him. Sometimes he heard footsteps behind him when he walked down the hallway to his door, but when he turned around, nothing was there. At first, he shrugged it off. Stress, he told himself. Just stress. But deep down, he knew better. He began to wonder if signing the contract had opened something inside him, something that was now spreading like ice through his soul. He kept replaying Mr. Vale's words. "Your soul isn't fully mine yet." That sentence circled through his mind like a storm cloud. If he still had a choice, why did it feel like everything was already falling apart? Daniel's friends noticed the change in him. He stopped answering messages. He ignored calls. He skipped gatherings and dinners, offering excuses that sounded thin even as he spoke them. One friend, Melissa, showed up at his door one evening after he didn't respond to her for days. She'd known him for years, long enough to see through the cracks he tried to hide. When he opened the door, she stared at him with wide, worried eyes. "Daniel, you look awful." He tried to smile, but it came out weak and empty. He told her he was tired, working too much, nothing serious. But she didn't believe him. She sat with him in his living room, looking around as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. "Something's wrong," she finally said. "You're not yourself. What's going on?" Daniel froze. For a moment, he wanted to tell her everything, to unload the truth and let someone else carry a little of the weight. But fear held his words captive. If he told her, would she even believe him? And if she did, would that put her in danger too? He lied instead. "I'm fine, just stressed." Melissa didn't push, but the sadness in her eyes cut through him. When she left, Daniel felt even more alone. He realized how far he'd drifted from the people who cared about him, and the distance scared him more than anything else. The more Daniel tried to fix things, the worse they became. He stayed late at work, hoping burying himself in spreadsheets and emails would distract him. But even there, Mr. Vale found him. Sometimes Daniel caught sight of him in reflections, polished glass doors, computer screens, even the metal of an elevator wall. Always watching, always smiling. He stopped taking the elevator altogether. Money poured in from unexpected sources. Investments he barely remembered making, bonuses he wasn't supposed to receive, opportunities that seemed too good to be random. At first, these things excited him. Now they felt like chains being slipped around his wrists. One evening, Daniel found a thick envelope slid under his apartment door. Inside was a check, an enormous one, along with a single-typed sentence. "Comfort comes easily when you walk the path you chose." He felt sick. He didn't remember asking for more money. He didn't want more. But the offer was there, sweet and poisonous. A temptation, a reminder, a trap. He tore the check in half, his hands shaking. But part of him wondered if that decision would cost him. Every day, Daniel fought a silent war inside himself. One side whispered promises of comfort, pleasure, and success. A life free from fear, pain, or struggle. A life he already tasted and part of him still wanted. The other side was a quiet, aching pull toward something more difficult but strangely peaceful. A path of honesty. A path of facing himself, his regrets, his mistakes, his broken pieces. That path terrified him even more than Mr. Vale. Admitting his wrongs meant admitting that he had thrown away parts of himself long before he ever met the mysterious buyer. Redemption wasn't a gift. It was a road paved with truth and truth could hurt more than anything. Daniel stood at the center of two worlds, unable to move forward or backward. The tension inside him grew so heavy that some nights he felt he might break apart. The physical world began shifting too, as if responding to the battle inside him. One night, he walked into his apartment to find all the lights off, even though he had left them on. When he flipped the switch, the lights blinked on for a moment before fading again, leaving the room dim and eerie. His heart pounded as he checked every room, but nothing was out of place. Another night, he woke to the sound of someone whispering his name. He sat up quickly, eyes wide, searching the room. No one was there, but the whisper lingered in his mind, threading itself into his thoughts like smoke. He began to fear sleep. He feared the dark corners of his apartment. He feared the stillness of the night, where the smallest sounds felt alive. He feared himself most of all. One morning, Daniel jolted awake before dawn, breathing hard as if he had been running. His nightmare vanished the moment he opened his eyes, but the panic stayed. He got out of bed and walked to the bathroom. When he turned on the light, he stared at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized the person standing there. His skin looked pale. His eyes were shadowed, tired, almost lifeless. He looked like someone fading away slowly, piece by piece. He touched the mirror with trembling fingers. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't try to hide from the truth. He was losing himself, and if he didn't choose a path soon, he might disappear completely, whether his soul was officially taken or not. Something inside him cracked open, not from fear, but from a painful kind of honesty. A small voice whispered inside him, steady and quiet. "You need help." He didn't know what kind. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he couldn't keep sinking like this. He had to face the truth he had been avoiding, the truth Mr. Vale hinted at. Redemption was possible, but it would cost him, and deep down, Daniel finally understood what that meant. He would have to confront the pain he had been running from his entire life. Daniel's days grew heavier until they pushed him to the edge of his strength. Even the simplest tasks, making coffee, checking emails, unlocking his car, felt like lifting something far too heavy. The pressure inside him was no longer a quiet ache. It was a loud, cracking weight that threatened to drown him. One night, after tossing and turning for hours, he finally rolled out of bed and sat on the cold floor. His chest hurt from holding everything in. His throat burned from words he never said. Tears he had refused to shed now pressed against his eyes like a rising tide. He whispered, "I can't do this anymore." He didn't know who he was talking to. Himself? God? The darkness? Maybe all three. For the first time, he didn't try to look strong. He let his head fall forward as tears spilled freely. The moment felt like something inside him finally broke open, not into pieces but into truth. He needed answers. He needed clarity. He needed to understand what had led him to this point, and he knew exactly where he had to go. The next morning, Daniel walked back to the old stone church. He didn't know why he was drawn there again, only that the pull inside him was too strong to ignore. When he stepped inside, the air felt different from the last time he'd been there. The fear that had gripped him before was replaced by something else, a quiet, trembling hope. The sanctuary was empty except for a janitor sweeping near the front pews. Daniel sat down in the same spot as before, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He didn't pray aloud. He simply sat in silence, letting the weight of his confusion, fear, and regret settle around him. For a moment, everything felt still, but then footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Daniel looked up and saw the church's pastor approaching him. Pastor Harding was an older man with gentle eyes and a calm presence that felt warm, not judging. Daniel had never spoken to him before, but the pastor seemed to sense something unsettled in him. He sat beside Daniel without a word. After a long pause, the pastor asked softly, "What is your heart carrying today?" The question struck Daniel like a wave. Tears rose again, surprising him with their intensity. He wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but the pastor didn't look away or react. He simply waited, patient and steady. Daniel realized then that this moment, the quiet, the presence, the invitation to speak, was the opposite of what Mr. Vale offered. Vale gave easy choices wrapped in fear. The pastor offered something harder but true, space to face himself. Slowly, Daniel spoke. He didn't tell the pastor everything about the contract. He couldn't, not yet. But he opened up about the things he could explain. The loneliness, the mistakes, the choices he regretted, the years spent trying to fill the emptiness inside him with success and money. He talked about how he had always felt like he wasn't enough. How every failure, every heartbreak, every moment of guilt had stuck to him like shadows. How he had carried those shadows for so long that he began to believe they defined him. As he spoke, the words poured out of him, pain, confusion, longing. It felt like releasing something he had held too tightly for years. The pastor didn't interrupt. He didn't offer quick solutions or simple comfort. He listened with a still, steady presence that helped Daniel breathe again. When Daniel finished, trembling and exhausted, the pastor spoke softly. "Pain doesn't disappear just because we ignore it," he said. "It grows in the dark. But when we bring it into the light, even a little, it loses some of its power." Daniel swallowed hard, the truth of those words settling deep inside him. The pastor continued, "You've been carrying burdens alone for far too long. But no soul is lost just because it wandered. Redemption doesn't start with perfection. It starts with honesty." Daniel felt his eyes sting again, but this time he didn't fight the tears. After a long pause, Daniel forced himself to ask the question that had haunted him since the day he signed the contract. "Do you believe someone can fix something they completely ruined?" The pastor's expression softened even more. "I believe people can make choices that lift them out of darkness. And sometimes, the deeper the darkness, the brighter the light waiting on the other side." Daniel nodded slowly. Then the pastor added something he didn't expect. "You're not the first person to walk into this church carrying something heavy, and you won't be the last. But you're here because part of you still wants to be whole." Daniel looked away, overwhelmed. He hadn't said anything about his soul, the contract, or Mr. Vale. Yet the pastor seemed to see far deeper into him than he had planned to reveal. The pastor stood and placed a hand gently on Daniel's shoulder. "When you're ready," he said, "come see me again. There's more you need to face, but not alone." Then he walked back toward the front of the church, leaving Daniel sitting in stunned silence. As Daniel sat there, something inside him shifted. A memory he had pushed away for years rose to the surface, sharp and clear. He saw a younger version of himself standing at his father's hospital bedside. His father, pale and tired, had reached out a weak hand to him. Daniel had been too angry, too heartbroken to take it. He had walked out before the man could say his final words. The guilt of that decision had lived inside him ever since, growing heavier with each passing year. It was the pain he never faced, the pain he tried to bury, the pain Mr. Vale had sensed when he approached him in that alley. Suddenly Daniel understood the real price Mr. Vale had mentioned. It wasn't money. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't even fear. It was forgiveness. Forgiving himself for the moment he regretted more than anything else. And that realization shattered something inside him. Daniel rose from the pew slowly, his legs unsteady, but his heart strangely lighter. The truth he had been running from was finally out in the open. Mr. Vale had offered him an escape from pain, but at the cost of his soul. Redemption required him to confront pain, but it might save him. The choice became clearer than ever, but the path ahead was still terrifying. As Daniel stepped out of the church into the sunlight, a quiet determination began forming inside him. He didn't know how to fight Mr. Vale. He didn't know if it was even possible, but he finally understood that the battle wasn't about the contract at all. It was about reclaiming the part of himself he had abandoned long before he ever met the buyer. The first step had been taken, but the hardest steps were still waiting. The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that slipped under Daniel's skin and made him feel exposed. He stood outside his old apartment building, its cracked steps, peeling paint, and flickering hallway light calling back memories of who he used to be before the contract. Before the lies, before the fall, he had chosen this place on purpose. He needed to face the darkness where it first found him. He took a slow breath and whispered, "I'm not running anymore." As if summoned by those words, the air thickened. A quiet pressure pushed against his chest, like the world was holding its breath. Then a shadow stretched across the sidewalk, and a figure appeared at the bottom of the steps. Mr. Vale. He looked the same as always, calm, clean-cut, dressed in a dark suit that seemed untouched by time or weather. But tonight there was something sharper in his eyes, a spark of irritation, or hunger. "Well," Mr. Vale said with a small tilt of his head, "I suppose congratulations are in order. You've made it farther than most." Daniel's stomach twisted, but he stood firm. His hands trembled, but he didn't hide them. "I'm done," he said quietly. "I'm not yours." A faint smile curved Mr. Vale's lips. A bold statement for someone standing on a foundation built by my generosity. Daniel clenched his fists. "Your generosity destroyed everything that mattered." Mr. Vale stepped closer, his shoes silent on the concrete. "You came to me," he said, "desperate, broken, begging for a way out." His voice softened, almost gentle. "And I gave you one. But it cost me everything. It cost exactly what you offered." Mr. Vale shrugged. "A soul in exchange for comfort. A simple business transaction." Daniel swallowed hard. "Not anymore." A breeze swept between them, carrying dust and the faint smell of old wood. The moment felt heavy, like the world stood on a knife's edge, waiting to see which way he would fall. Mr. Vale's eyes narrowed. "You know, breaking the contract requires payment." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know." Mr. Vale raised a single hand. The air shimmered, and suddenly Daniel felt the weight of everything he had gained. His job, his money, his status, his apartment filled with things he never needed. Every luxury he had accepted now pressed against him like invisible chains. "If you want out," Mr. Vale said, "you give it all back. Every dollar, every advantage, every piece of success you didn't earn." Daniel breathed in deeply. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. Still, the truth landed hard. He imagined his bank accounts drained, his apartment emptied, his job gone, all the things he had used to cover his shame ripped away. Mr. Vale studied him closely. "You will return to the life you crawled away from, and it will be harder this time, more painful." His voice lowered. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of suffering?" Daniel's heartbeat thundered, but his voice stayed steady. "I'd rather suffer honestly than live comfortably in chains." For the first time, Mr. Vale's expression cracked. A faint flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quick, like lightning. "You humans," he muttered. "So dramatic." Daniel almost laughed. "Look who's talking." But then he grew serious again. "Take it. Take all of it. I don't want anything that came from you." Mr. Vale snapped his fingers. The world didn't shake. No lightning struck. No fire erupted. Instead, Daniel simply felt lighter, as if a tight belt had finally loosened around his chest. He didn't feel rich anymore. He didn't feel powerful, but he felt real. Mr. Vale frowned. "You make this too easy." "It wasn't easy," Daniel said softly. "You just don't understand what I gained." Mr. Vale stepped back, studying him with something unreadable in his eyes. A mix of frustration and curiosity. "You think this changes anything?" he asked. "You think giving up your toys makes you whole?" "People don't change, Daniel. They break. They bend. They crawl back." Daniel shook his head. "Not this time. You'll regret this." "Maybe," Daniel admitted, "but at least the regrets will be mine." A long silence stretched between them. Then something strange happened. Mr. Vale's form wavered slightly, like smoke caught in a gust. His edges blurred. His presence, once cold, sharp, and suffocating, began to thin. He was losing hold. "You're choosing pain," Mr. Vale hissed. "I'm choosing freedom. You're choosing weakness. I'm choosing truth. You're choosing. I'm choosing me." The final word landed with a power Daniel didn't know he possessed. Mr. Vale's expression twisted, not in rage, but in something closer to disappointment. He gave a bitter, almost impressed laugh. "Well, then," he whispered, voice fading, "enjoy your freedom, Daniel Rios." And just like that, he vanished. The air felt cleaner, brighter, as if someone had opened a window in a room long sealed shut. Daniel staggered back, suddenly exhausted. His knees hit the steps, and he sat there for a long moment, breathing in the cool night air. It felt like the first real breath he'd taken in years. His world wasn't fixed. His problems weren't gone. His future wasn't certain. But for the first time, he felt peace. A deep, quiet peace that didn't come from money, power, or escape. It came from truth. Daniel walked away from the old apartment with empty pockets, but a steady heart. He knew he would return to a simpler life, maybe even a harder one. But he also knew he wouldn't be alone. In the days that followed, he told his mother the truth, not the supernatural version, but the part that mattered. The part about wanting to be a better man. Her tearful embrace felt like a gift he didn't deserve but was grateful for. His sister didn't trust him at first, but Daniel didn't push. He simply showed up, helping her with groceries, visiting after work, listening instead of avoiding. Slowly, the ice between them began to melt. The wealth was gone. The comfort was gone. The shadows were gone. But the healing had begun. And this time, he wasn't running from his past. He was walking toward his future. The mornings looked different now for Daniel. Not brighter, not easier, but cleaner. He woke in a small rented room above a local hardware store. It wasn't fancy. The walls were thin, the bathroom sink dripped sometimes, and the bed springs creaked whenever he shifted. But it was his. Not bought with fear or false promises, but earned honestly. He found a modest job helping stock shelves at a neighborhood market. It didn't pay much, but the work was steady, simple, and honest. And for the first time in years, he didn't walk into a workplace with a knot in his stomach. He didn't pretend to be someone he wasn't. He didn't feel like he was hiding. Every day, he greeted customers, arranged fruit displays, unloaded crates from delivery trucks. He worked with his hands, and the sore muscles at night felt like proof he still had a life to rebuild. There were no shadows watching him anymore. No quiet whispers reminding him of what he owed. Just the slow, steady rhythm of a man trying to become whole again. Daniel was poor again, but he wasn't empty. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Daniel walked back to the old stone church. The doors were open, letting warm sunlight spill across the pews. He stepped inside slowly, almost afraid the peace might slip away if he moved too quickly. He sat in the same place as before. Only this time, his heart wasn't heavy with fear or guilt. It was full, still healing, still tender but full. As he looked at the wooden cross hanging above the altar, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: gratitude. Not for miracles, not for sudden blessings, but for the strength to face himself, the courage to choose a harder path, and the grace that had met him when he thought he was beyond saving. He realized something important in that moment, something he had missed for much of his life. He had never truly sold his soul. He had only abandoned it for a while, lost in the noise, buried it under shame, but had been there, waiting for him, through every mistake, every dark choice, every desperate moment. He hadn't been reclaimed by force. He had returned by choice. That truth settled over him like a quiet promise. As Daniel stood and walked toward the church exit, he whispered a promise, not to God, not to the world, but to himself. A promise to live differently, to love fiercely, to take responsibility for his steps, even the hard ones, to give more than he took, to show others the same compassion he had once believed he didn't deserve. He stepped outside into the sunlight, feeling it warm his face. The breeze carried the scent of cut grass and blooming flowers. Life, simple and imperfect, moved on around him. Cars passed. Children laughed nearby. A dog barked somewhere down the street. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt part of it. As he walked down the church steps, he understood a truth far deeper than fear or regret. Anyone can lose themselves. Anyone can fall. Anyone can wander into darkness when life becomes too heavy. But anyone can be found again. Anyone can turn back. Anyone can rise. And Daniel Rios, once broken, once desperate, once convinced he was beyond redemption, was living proof. A soul lost is not a soul gone. A soul reclaimed is a story reborn.